Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to have you here today as we explore a fascinating topic: why you will marry the wrong person. Today's presentation is inspired by Elaine de Botton's thought-provoking essay that became one of the New York Times' most read articles of the year. We'll discuss why, despite our hopes and intentions, most of us end up marrying someone who is quite the ideal. Over the next few slides, we'll uncover some surprising truths about love, expectations, and relationships. So let's get started. Let's take a closer look at the philosophy of imperfection. At first glance, this idea might seem quite pessimistic, right? But de Botton isn't talking about cynicism here. Instead, he's emphasizing realism and humility. He suggests that by accepting imperfection, we can actually transform it into love. His talk at Google really expands on this, blending philosophy, psychology, and a touch of wit to make his points. Now, one of the key ideas he explores is why we get angry about love. Interestingly, he points out that a lot of our anger about our love lives is actually a hidden form of hope. When we get upset about losing our keys or being stuck in traffic, it's because we secretly expect life to be smooth and frustration-free. Similarly, when we get upset with our partner, it's because we still hold onto the hope that love should be perfect. This brings us to philosophy's role. De Botton argues that philosophy's job is to gently lower our expectations. Why? Because when we do that, we suffer less from anger and frustration, and instead, we develop more acceptance. It's about recognizing and embracing imperfection as part of the human experience, which ultimately helps us find more peace in love and life. You know, a big reason why many of us end up marrying the wrong person is that we simply don't know ourselves very well. We often see ourselves as more straightforward than we really are. The author describes us as strange, not in a dangerous sense, but in being psychologically complicated. That means we have layers and nuances that are hard to fully understand. Think about the people around us, friends, for example. They tend to keep things light and pleasant. They don't usually tell us the full truth about who we are because they want to enjoy good times with us, not rock the boat with brutal honesty. Parents, on the other hand, might see our flaws clearly but tend to hide them out of love. They want to protect us, so they don't always point out what's really going on beneath the surface. And then there are ex-partners. They might know our weaknesses intimately, but because the relationship is over, they often choose to leave rather than address those issues directly. So, what does all this mean? It means we often step into new relationships with very little awareness of how difficult we might actually be to live with. We walk in without fully understanding ourselves, which can lead to problems down the line. Recognizing this is a crucial step in understanding why so many of us struggle with authentic connection and lasting love. When we talk about addiction, de Botton offers a broader perspective than what we might typically think. It's not just about drugs or alcohol, but about any behavior that helps us avoid sitting alone with our own uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. You see, when we're constantly escaping ourselves, whether through work, screens, or busyness, we're actually avoiding true self-knowledge. And here's the thing. Without understanding ourselves deeply, it becomes nearly impossible to truly love someone else. So these patterns of distraction, like overworking, mindless scrolling, or always being busy, serve as barriers to genuine connection, both with ourselves and others. Recognizing this can be a powerful step toward genuine intimacy and self-awareness, which ultimately ties back to the core theme of understanding ourselves better. The challenge of vulnerability is at the heart of love. Loving someone truly means we have to admit something difficult, saying, "I need you," and "I can't survive without you." That kind of honesty can feel terrifying, and so our minds develop defenses to protect us from it. One common defense is what we call anxious attachment. Instead of directly asking, "Do you love me?" we might become critical, rigid, or overly procedural, like questioning, "Why are you late?" Or "Did you take out the trash?" These behaviors are really just cover-ups for a deeper fear, fearing that we might be unloved or not enough. On the other hand, there's avoidant attachment. When vulnerability hits close to home, some of us act busy, dismissive, or emotionally distant. We pretend we don't need anyone or anything. But ironically, that only erodes trust and connection over time. True intimacy, then, requires humility. The recognition that beneath all of our defenses, we're still just children longing for reassurance. Being able to admit that need, to be vulnerable, is essential for genuine closeness. When we hear the phrase, love is a feeling, it feels so natural to think of it as something that just happens to us. But in reality, love isn't simply an instinct or an unchangeable emotion. Instead, it's a skill, something we can develop over time. Our culture often encourages us to follow our hearts, but Botton warns us that blindly trusting feelings can lead to mistakes. Why? Because feelings are heavily influenced by early experiences, some positive, others quite painful. Think about it. We're often attracted not just to partners who make us happy, but to those who feel familiar. And that sense of familiarity can include unresolved childhood wounds. That's why sometimes we reject perfectly kind and loving partners, labeling them as boring. Deep down, they might not trigger the pain or the subconscious issues linked to our past experiences. So if love were just an instinct, it would be straightforward. But because it's shaped by complex patterns and past wounds, it requires effort. It's a skill that needs to be learned, practiced, and consciously cultivated. And that's a key idea. Viewing love as a skill opens up the possibility for growth and improvement, rather than just relying on fleeting feelings. Many couples fall into the trap of thinking that their partner should just know what they're feeling without having to say anything. This often leads to feelings of sulking or silent resentment, which can really create a rift in the relationship. As Botton wisely points out, if we don't explain, we can never be understood. So the key here is that communication is really about teaching your partner what you need, what hurts you, what makes you feel reassured, and what love looks like for you. And it's important to remember that teaching with calmness and generosity makes all the difference. When we approach these conversations with patience and kindness, our message is much more likely to be received. On the other hand, shouting or humiliating your partner when you're upset only backfires and makes communication even harder. Teaching badly through anger and frustration will almost always fail. So the main takeaway is, be clear, be calm, and be generous. That's how we foster understanding and build stronger, more connected relationships. Let's talk about a common misconception, the idea that criticism is a sign of hatred. Another myth is that love means unconditional acceptance of everything about someone. But in reality, no one should accept every part of us because we're all flawed in some way. True love, in its healthiest form, involves helping each other grow. And that often includes criticism, but not in a harsh or destructive way, but in the noblest sense, as an effort to make each other better versions of ourselves. Now, building on that, there's this idea from Donald Winnicott about being good enough. Instead of striving for perfection, which is impossible, we aim for good enough. He used the example of parenting. Instead of expecting the perfect parent, we recognize that a good enough parent provides what's necessary and allows room for growth. The same applies to partnerships. Instead of demanding perfection from our partners, we accept that being good enough is more realistic and healthier. This ties into the overall theme of the presentation, highlighting that healthy relationships are built on acceptance, growth, and realistic expectations. It's about understanding that imperfection is natural and that love involves supporting each other through that imperfection. Let's talk about compatibility and commitment. Compatibility isn't something we simply find. It's something we create every day through small acts of compromise. It's about working together, adjusting, and making space for each other. And commitment, it's not about giving up or resigning ourselves to something shameful. No, it's a noble act, a conscious choice to stay with an imperfect person, to stick through the ups and downs. If we expect perfection, we set ourselves up for loneliness because perfection doesn't exist. But if we accept imperfection, we open ourselves to love, real, messy, beautiful love. Now turning to Kierkegaard's wisdom, Botton highlights his paradox. No matter what choice we make, whether it's marriage, choosing to remain single, acting, or not acting, we will have regrets. And that's okay. Regret isn't a sign that we failed. It's part of what it means to be human. So the key takeaway here is that life isn't about finding the perfect partner or living a flawless life. Instead, it's about embracing both the comedy and tragedy of imperfection itself. That's where true growth and connection happen. So here, the final thought I want to leave you with. When we hear that you will marry the wrong person, it can sound like a curse, right? But actually, it's quite the opposite. It's liberation. It frees us from the burden of perfectionism, from the myth that there's only one perfect soulmate out there for us. And it also releases us from the rage and frustration that come with unrealistic hopes about love. The real secret isn't about finding someone who is flawless. Instead, it's about learning how to be generous, how to communicate effectively, and how to make compromises with someone who is, by nature, imperfect, just like all of us. And importantly, the other person is doing the same for us. What Botton emphasizes is that this isn't failure. It's actually the highest form of success. It's about building a deep, resilient connection through acceptance and effort, rather than waiting for perfection that simply doesn't exist. So, in the end, love is about embracing imperfection and growing together. That's the true art and the real achievement.